Hi people, and welcome back to my channel. So today's video I feel like has been highly anticipated and has been long awaited. I've been working on this video for a little over a month now. So today we are not only reviewing the Morphe and Jaclyn Hill palette finally, but we are also seeing if the potential dupe is an actual dupe. So the Beauty Glazed Impressed You palette has it's been stirring up a lot of talk lately. I did find mine on Amazon for like 13 bucks, 12 or 13 bucks, so it's really affordable. I feel like this palette will probably start increasing in price pretty soon because it is, you know, getting so much talk and hype and stuff. Every single video I've watched has just talked about this palette. Like they haven't even tried the Morphe palette. So you can't call something a dupe until you have them both in your hands and you've tried both of them. But I've used every single shade in this palette and in the Beauty Glazed palette in one way or another, whether it be on my eyes and actually wearing them throughout the day, or swatching them and, you know, seeing how they compare in quality, how they compare in shade, intensity. And I even went to the extent of making myself a chart. Like I put a lot of detail into this. This is the Jaclyn Hill palette, okay? So I went through every single shade in the palette, and if there was a dupe in the Beauty Glazed palette, it got a check mark. If there wasn't a dupe, it got an X. Now, looking at the Beauty Glazed palette, just at first glance, it looks just like the Jaclyn Hill palette. So as I said, this video is a review of the palettes and also a comparison of the two. I'm not going to put them on my eyes or anything. I was going to do that, but I feel like this video will be so long. So I'm just going to tell you my experience with both of them, pros and cons. There are pros and cons to both. I feel like each palette has its strengths and weaknesses. And if you're new to my channel and new to how I do things, I'm very thorough and very detailed. I'm honest, I'm unbiased, and if there is any controversy or like drama surrounding a certain product like there is with the Jaclyn Hill palette, which we'll get into that later as well, I try to go in with blinders on and I don't think about that stuff. I say that because I feel like people kind of have bias with anything related to Morphe or Jaclyn Hill. I'm not going to support anybody that I think are absolutely terrible people. Like my problems with most people or most brands, it's just annoyances. Like it's not that they're terrorists. A couple of different controversial things about this palette is number one, the packaging. So it's a white packaging. I forgot what the original packaging was when they first released it before they came to Ulta, but I think it was like a cloth material or something like that that just got dirty really fast. People complained, they griped and nagged, and I can understand because when something gets dirty, it's not aesthetically pleasing to you. Well, when they came to Ulta, they changed the packaging. They took the feedback that people were giving them. Now it's like a regular like plastic, I guess, plastic cardboard. People got so pissed because we spent our money on this old packaging. Now I'm stuck with the old nasty packaging that looks horrible, and now everyone else has a good. Well, what do you expect? Like it's kind of like damned if you do and damned if you don't. Like you complain about something and you wanted it to change, but when they do change it, then it's like jealousy and envy. So now let's talk about the price. So you have 35 shades for $38. Typically Morphe palettes are about $22 to $23 and you get the same amount of shadows. So people were really mad that they spiked up the price from $22 to $38 because it's a collab. And I kind of understand to a degree because when you're used to paying a certain price for something, when they change it, it's like, okay, what's happening right now? And I think people were just kind of mad because it was Jaclyn Hill. I think if it were anybody else, I don't think it would have been as big of a deal. It seems like people are completely okay with paying $42, $45, $50, $52 for these high-end palettes that have 12 and 14 shades, but when you're paying $38, which is less than that, for 35 shades, people get mad. When you break that down, it's about $1.08 or $1.09 per pan. So here are the shades, and as you can see, you have a mixture of mattes, shimmers, metallics, foiled finishes. You have pretty much everything in here. She's thrown in some pops of color down here. So I feel like this palette has its pros and cons. It has strengths and weaknesses, but overall, I actually do like this palette. Is it my favorite palette in the world? No. I definitely feel like this palette's strong suit is its shimmers. The shimmers are so buttery and they're so packed in here. You know, she harped for so long about how they used a different pressing mechanism or machine or something. So they're pressed in there differently than other Morphe palettes, blah, blah, blah. They are pressed in there pretty tight as far as the shimmers go. Now the mattes, that's a different story. I feel like there's a lot of flakage and a lot of debris when you dip your brush into the matte shades. That's not to say that I don't like them, but it can be a nuisance. So yeah, as far as the shimmers go, they're all pretty consistent across the board. They're super intense. They have an almost metallic-like finish, and they look wet on the eyes. They're not powdery feeling. They feel so packed in there, like so tightly pressed that it feels like a cream shadow. You can pack them on, and you don't have to really do a whole lot of work to get a super intense look. Like they pack on so fast, you don't have to do a whole lot of layering. The only two that I don't feel that way about are these two up here, and these are more satin finished. So as far as the mattes go, I do like the mattes. They do have a lot of fallout, however. There is a lot of flakage and debris, not only on your face, but also in the pans, and they're definitely a different formula than the older Morphe palettes. Now, a lot of people will say that they like the newer formulations of the newer palettes from Morphe better than the older ones. I'm opposite. I like the older palettes better. I feel like they weren't as good for swatching. This is a good like social media swatch palette. They swatch so intensely, and they almost stain your hands when you swatch them and stain your fingers. So it's definitely good for swatching, but that doesn't always translate onto the eyes very well. And if you're not someone that's super experienced in makeup, or you're a beginner, then that can give you some trouble with blending and stuff. It can take you quite a while if you don't have the right tools. You know, if you don't have good brushes, that can give you problems. So I would almost prefer something that has lighter pigmentation and lighter opacity. But the mattes do work. I do like them. I just feel like it takes me a little bit longer to complete an eye look. I feel like I spend a lot of time blending. And I will say there are a lot of like crease transition shades in this palette. Like in this little zone right here, there are a lot, and it kind of gets repetitive. And I would have liked to have seen maybe a little bit more variation, because these are so similar. Like these two shades right here almost look identical on the eyes. These two right here look almost identical. And then even down here, there's a lot of shades that look very similar. Like these dark browns will basically look the same on the eyes. These like orangey red tones, they look really similar on the eyes. I do wish there were some matte skin tone colored shadows in here. I wish there were like a matte bone color, like an ivory shade, like a vanilla. So you have nothing to set your eyelid primer or your brow bone highlight. There's not really a matte brow bone highlight in here. So I feel like that's where she really dropped the ball, because really the only thing she has are these two shades right here that are kind of like MAC nylon. I know she uses that all the time, so I think that's what she was trying to go for. But these have satin finish. Like these are like a satin sheen. Another thing I have an issue with is the fact that, and this could just be a personal issue, and this is something I have seen with shades in this color family. So, you know, this shade right here is what I'm drawn to. Like a deep burgundy cranberry red. I love this shadow, or the color of it anyway. But the thing is, it does not translate onto my eyes the way it looks in the palette. So, you know, in the palette, it looks like it's pretty red. Like there's a very strong red tone to it. But this just kind of goes to like a dark, muddy, purpley brown. Like it kind of loses that really pretty red tone and just kind of muddies up on my eye. So I hate that, but I found that a way to kind of get around that and to avoid that a little bit is to kind of tap my brush in instead of, you know, going in and blending automatically. But that is something that I've seen with a lot of like red or purple undertone eyeshadows. Like if you watch my Too Faced Just Peachy palette reviews and tutorials, then you will have known that the purple shade just did not translate onto my eyes very well. It also muddied, it creased, faded, it did a whole lot of weird stuff that typically my eyes don't make any other shadows do. There may be a little bit of purple in this shadow, so it just seems like, for me, purple eyeshadows just don't translate that well onto my eyes. So that's probably just a personal problem. And I will say another thing that I wish you would have done differently, this is just a personal preference. You may have this palette or look at this palette and think completely different. You may think this is done perfectly, and that's fine. This is just an opinion. That's what we're here for, and I am allowed to give it. But I just wish that instead of these pops of color, which a lot of people are enjoying, I would have personally rather have seen like cool tone shades. Because like I said, most of these shadows are very warm toned. So I think she could have appealed to more of her audience if she put some cool tones in there, maybe some more pinks or mauves or like rosy tones. I feel like there could have been a little bit more variation, and I feel like these are fun, but they're not practical and they're not good for every day. What do you guys think? Do you think that these shades are perfect? Do you like the fact that she's thrown in some pops of color in here? My only thing is I'm not super artsy. Like I don't have a very good eye for throwing together shades that aren't common sense. You know, like I can look at, you know, these two shades, like this shade and this shade, like orange tone shades, and I can say, oh, yeah, those go together. They'll look great on the eye. But as far as these teals and purples and blues and like these emerald green tones, which are so, so pretty, but they're a little bit hard to pair. So if you don't have an eye for it, if you're not super artsy like me, then you may look at these and say, okay, well, what do I pair that with? Like, how do I combine these crazy pops of color with a neutral palette? So to me, it's just a little bit more challenging. That's what my thoughts are on the Jaclyn Hill palette. Now I want to do a separate review of the Beauty Glazed palette and give you my thoughts, pros, cons, likes, dislikes on this palette. So this is, let's see, I want to pull up the exact price that I paid for it. This is $11.98 on Amazon. But the first thing I noticed is that it's a lot smaller. There's quite a bit of a difference. But I will say, I like the packaging better of the Beauty Glazed palette. This material is so nice and it's so aesthetically pleasing, and it doesn't get dirty really easily. Like you can't really see the dirt on it because, I don't know if you guys can tell, but the type of material that it is, it's like a glitter, but it's not really like a glitter. It's like a foiled kind of finish. I don't know if you guys can see. It's not flaky or anything. So like I said earlier, it looks very, very similar, but just looking at it, it looks a lot cheaper. Like the quality is definitely not up to par with the Jaclyn Hill palette, but the mattes perform so well on the eyes. Like they look so flaky, and when you dip your brush into it or when you swatch it with your finger, so much product gets flaked off, and it flakes off in chunks. Like it feels like it's not very finely pressed. I don't know if you guys can see this. Like right there, can you see that big chunk of product right there? I do experience fallout with both of these palettes, so that's definitely something they have in common. On the eyes, it just diffuses and softens so fast. Like they're really, really easy to work with. However, the shimmers in this palette are kind of sucky. You can get them to work, like there's very low quality and very cheap looking, and they have a hard time building and layering upon themselves. And another difference I see is that the Jaclyn Hill palette's a little bit longer lasting. I feel like the pigment is a little richer in these shadows, whereas the Beauty Glazed palette shadows are just a little bit, they're just a little bit cheap. They just look cheaper. Like they don't necessarily look cheaper on the eyes, or the mattes don't anyway. The shimmers, they're something to be desired, but I just feel like they're just not as rich in pigments. Only 13 shades out of the Beauty Glazed palettes were dupes for the Jaclyn Hill shadows. That means 22 shadows were not dupes. You know, and I went through and I swatched every single shade in both palettes. I will say the majority of the dupes from the Beauty Glazed palette were definitely in the mattes. There weren't really a whole lot of shimmers that were exact. So is the Beauty Glazed palette a dupe? I can't say that it is. It's a cheaper alternative. It's another option. You can get very, very similar looks with this. If you're on a budget, go for this. But the Jaclyn Hill palette, as far as the quality goes, it's a lot richer in pigment. It's a lot higher quality. So I wish that I could give you guys better news. I wish I could come to you and say, yes, the Beauty Glazed palette's a dupe. Go save your money. I'm not gonna lie to you. I have very high standards to call something a dupe. But please don't feel like you have to go out and buy the Jaclyn Hill palette just because I think it's better, because it is better. But that doesn't mean I think it's a must-have. Like, it's not my holy grail go-to favorite palette in the world. Like, I'm just not super drawn to this color scheme anymore. Like, I'm kind of getting away from warm tones and I'm moving more into like cool tones and berry tones, pink tones, stuff like that. So that's just a personal preference. I know I will get back into warm tones at some point, and maybe then I'll be a die-hard fan of this. I just feel like where it takes me so long to do any kind of look with this, it just kind of steers me away from using it. But like I said, I'm not gonna sit here and waste your time and give you swatches of every single shade in both palettes, because like I said, I don't think swatches are all that accurate. But what I will do is insert a clip of me swatching out the actual dupes in this palette. So like I said, there are 13 dupes in here. So yeah, let's look at some swatches. So thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. Mwah.